I think it's time for the V&A to engage with the uncomfortable and difficult aspects of its own history and its own collections.
It is for us to actually say, well, hold on a minute, we're all responsible, and let's make us more responsible by opening up the collections so we can have wider discussions.
This is a momentum that is building up, and I think the museum today is much more receptive to this sort of research than it may have been 20 or 30 years ago.
We are the V&A Research Institute, designed to open up new dialogues around our collections, how to access them, how to display them.
I'm an academic and researcher on this project. So what I'm doing is looking at the V&A's links with slave ownership, absentee slave owners as collectors, someone who lived in Britain but owned people and plantations in the Caribbean. I'm looking at the previous owners of objects that are now kept here and cross-referencing with a list of slave owners to see what matches I could find. Several here: Baring, Beckford, and Ralph Bernal, which would indicate that objects here were once owned by absentee slave owners.
My name is Victoria Adukwei Bulley. I am a poet, writer and filmmaker. The brief was basically a call for an artist to come in and respond to ongoing research into the V&A collection, looking at absentee slave owners, and to respond artistically.
We were trying to find an artist who could actually understand not just the object story, but it was also a person who could create something that was much more accessible, that would move an audience.
One thing I've been trying to do is to look at some of the Ancestry.com slave registers of former British colonial dependencies.
I guess it's bringing together an academic and an artist to see what can be produced when we both bring our own strengths to this project.
Hannah's work has allowed me to look at the items and see the bigger picture, and also look at the histories of their owners and the history that's behind them that is not seen.
I provided Victoria with a list of people and objects, and from that she chose 6 objects that might make an interesting jumping off point.
So this is one of the objects that we've been looking at, the pink tea set. In no way does it say that it was afforded by slave labour, and I think it's that contradiction that I'm very interested in, the contradiction between where these items came from and where the money to afford them came from.
This history is found across the museum, between 1,000 and 2,000 objects that are linked with slave ownership, and that is absolutely only a snapshot. These objects wouldn't be here, most probably, if it wasn't for the thousands and thousands of enslaved people who laboured in order for people in Britain to make money.
We are a product of a very dominant and powerful empire from the 19th century, and it's still evident in our galleries today. And here for the V&A is our chance for Hannah to work directly with our collections and tell us more about the objects that we are responsible for.
These are the diaries of Henry Cole, who was the very first director of the museum. I was interested in finding out more about the museum's acquisition of the Ralph Bernal collection. Lots of slave owners had objects that are now here, but Bernal had the most. And these diaries show that after Ralph Bernal died, Henry Cole went to visit Mrs. Bernal to look at the collection. And he writes, "The greater part, if not all, ought to be secured for the nation."
After choosing the items, the idea was to use images of them and frame those images with a very ornate gold frame. My response to the brief was to place myself in images alongside images of the items, creating a series of portraits and films which I feature in as a way of questioning how the items are changed by my presence and what their histories might include. I wanted to provoke questions about the items and their histories, because these questions aren't very evident just by looking at the items, but in terms of how I'm holding them, it's interesting visually.
what Victoria can do in a way that I can't is draw attention to this work in an important and direct way. And I think that's particularly important in this project because there might be archival records related to slave owners, but there's so little related to enslaved people themselves.
It's actually somebody telling you a story that you will never have known before, but it's the way in which they actually put that over.
The other side of the response is me writing a series of poems which are going to be placed as audio onto the visual images of the films.
What we're doing here is creating something which is much more about reaching out to the public, trying to make this research more visible.
Obviously Victoria's been working both in poetry and in film, which is a really great thing for the web. That means that we can showcase it across the world very, very quickly, and that means that the V&A gets to talk to as many people as possible.
What we have achieved with this project is unearthing the pervasiveness of this history and the importance of engaging with it.
This has actually broadened my understanding of the collection, but also some of the work that I do with the African Heritage Guides as well. I think it will actually help when we're talking about content for the tours that they're offering in the museum.
We need to be able to explain our objects to as many people as we possibly can, and everybody's perspectives need to be represented as far as our collection can do that.
The idea is to show that the museum is an active place of engagement and research into the collection that it holds.
I think museums should be places where healing occurs in some way, and I think that it's important to tell the other story that's facing away from the viewer.
Oh, my unconsented beloveds, my stillborn dawns. Oh, my hands, empty of even a scalp to oil, of a flower bed to make good of a grave. If you could bring them back, if you could return to them their lost livings, if you would listen, stop crying, there would be more for us to speak about than weather. We might begin to talk like perhaps we talk in the other universe, in which we speak of sisterhood and other myths.